Hi, it's Nathan, Kobo and Conversations producer. We're going to be back very soon with new episodes. But for now, we wanted to bring you this episode where Michael spoke with Julia Quinn, the author of the Bridgerton series of romance novels. Maybe you've heard it already. Maybe you haven't. We know we've got a lot of new listeners. In any case, here it is. It's lovely. And it's from February 2021, when the Bridgerton series had just hit Netflix. Enjoy.
I've written damaged people, but never so damaged that they are unnecessarily cruel and mean. I've joked before that I've tried to write a bad boy, and then he keeps turning around and doing something nice.
I'm Michael Tamblyn, CEO of Rakuten Kobo. We make e-readers and apps, and we sell ebooks and audiobooks all over the world, and we do it because we love reading, and we want to make reading lives better. One of the best parts of the work that we do is that we get to talk with authors about their books, as well as the books that shaped them as writers and as readers. Welcome to Kobo and Conversation. My guest today is Julia Quinn, best-selling author of the Bridgerton series. Starting with The Duke and I, it's the story, really a set of linked stories, each about a member of the Bridgerton family, and all of whom love one another fiercely. And of course, it's the basis for the Netflix series, titled simply Bridgerton, but it also spirals out from there to other series with related families, atrocious musical performances, multiple epilogues, making her one of the reigning queens of Happily Ever After. She has won just about every romance writing award there is a member of the Romance Writers of America Hall of Fame, has been on the New York Times bestseller list 15 times last time I checked. Julia Quinn, welcome to Kobo.
Hi, thank you for having me.
To kick this off, and to help you and our listeners understand why this is an important interview to me, is it okay if I tell you a little story?
Yeah.
Okay. When we were first getting Kobo started back in 2010 and 2011, two very important things happened. The first was that we realized, and it's obvious now, but it wasn't then, how important romance was going to be as a category and how easily romance readers were making this jump from print to ebooks. And although I had been a bookseller for a long time, it wasn't a category that I knew a lot about, which seemed like a problem considering that the success of the enterprise now depended on us making a lot of romance readers as happy as they possibly could be. But it was solved by the second important thing that happened, which was that I got engaged to a fantastic woman. See, it's a love story. A lawyer, an advocate for seniors named Laura Watts, who's now my wife, Laura Tamblyn Watts. She moved across the country for me, from Vancouver to Toronto. And as a West Coast person yourself, you know that that never happens. And as the moving truck was pulling up, she took me aside and said, okay, you're going to see some things today, and how you react to them is probably going to determine the happiness of our relationship. And so the first thing that came out was furniture, which was good. We needed furniture. The second was about 150 pairs of shoes, and they were seriously good shoes. And I just installed 100 feet of closet space, so as long as I didn't need any for myself, that was going to be fine. The third was about 40 boxes of romance novels. And I turned to her and said, we need to talk. And she was instantly ready to throw down and defend her reading preferences. So I quickly followed it up with, I need to know as much as possible, as quickly as possible about romance writers and romance writing. Can you help me? And she looked at me very appraisingly and said, maybe. If you give me the next 60 days of your reading life, and if you do exactly as I tell you, I might be able to turn you into a not half bad romance reader. And so she made me a romance crash course. Historical, modern, Scottish, Western, paranormal, Eloisa James and Lisa Kleypas and Nora Roberts, Mary Bullock and Sarah MacLean, 60 days. But the very first book she gave me to read, the one that started it off, was a Bridgerton novel by Julia Quinn.
This story is everything. Oh my gosh. I can't even tell you how hard it was for me not to interrupt you and be like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. This is incredible.
Now, oddly, it wasn't the first one. I think it was the third. It was Romancing Mr. Bridgerton about Colin and Penelope.
That's the fourth, actually, but yeah.
The fourth, thank you. Okay. And I almost messed up the curriculum because I then wanted to start the next one or go back to the first through third ones. Mm-hmm. But it was my introduction to the families, to the Bridgertons and the Featherstones and the Smythe-Smiths and to Lady Whistledown and everyone in their orbit. And so I just off the bat wanted to thank you for that, because that was the best possible introduction to the genre that I could possibly have.
Well, I'm thinking maybe I could take credit for your marriage. I mean, if that hadn't gone well, who knows what would have...
Totally. Yeah. Exactly.
I can so see the scene with her being like, all right, we're going to have a showdown right now, because every romance reader has been questioned on her taste at some point. So that is awesome.
We have a lot to talk about. The books, the show, living with an epidemiologist husband during a pandemic, the graphic novel with your sister. But because we're both about writing and reading lives, let's go back to young Julie. Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first book that really grabbed you as you were growing up?
First? I don't know. I mean, I know I collected the Bobbsey Twins series in hardcover. They had these lavender hard covers. And part of the reason I collected that was that because my older sister collected Nancy Drew and I had to have my own thing.
And Nancy Drew was like the all yellow covers, like that.
That was yellow.
Yes.
And we lived about 2 hours away from our grandparents, and we would go visit them from time to time. And they would always give my sister and me $10. That was, a $10 bill. That was the gift. And then we would get home and we would always beg my mother to stop at Caldor's, which was this kind of discount department store that was in our town. And they had a book section, and the Nancy Drew and the Bobbsey Twin books sold for $2 each. So we could each get 5 books, and my mom would then pay the tax, which was nice, which I think came to 75 cents each. And so we would always say, we couldn't even go home. We'd say, Mom, you have to stop at Kelter's. You have to stop at Kelter's. And we would, get the 5 books. And I remember it was as much about the reading of those as the collecting them too, because they were numbered and they matched and they were beautiful and they were just these things to covet. So that was definitely something really early on I loved. I loved those Bobbsey Twin books, and I don't know what happened to them. And there was like this mystery too. There were like 10 books that were not available. I'm sure there was some sort of weird rights issue. Now that I'm in publishing, I understand this, but it was like the mystery of what happened in like numbers 23 to 32 or something like that.
They were part of a sub-rights deal that only had them in the UK, and
who knows? And like occasionally I would see hints of something somewhere. I mean, there's no internet, so I don't know where I seen pictures of these where you could see them with older covers, but they weren't available with the new covers. And, gosh, I haven't thought about this mystery for so long. And now I'm going to have to I'm probably going to end up on eBay collecting Bobbsey Twin books now. I just going to have to do it.
You can thank me for that.
Ugh.
So your mother was supporting this. Family of readers?
Oh, yeah. Family of readers. Absolutely.
Everybody?
Everybody's a reader.
So when did romance make its way into your reading consciousness?
I know that there was this one time I was at my grandmother's house, and she had a subscription to Good Housekeeping. And Good Housekeeping would publish condensed versions of novels that have, inside the pages. And like the first 4 pages were on a different stock of paper, it wasn't glossy, so you could find it easily, and they would print it with some sort of, illustration. And then it'd be like, continue on page 179, and then you'd keep reading. And I'm pretty sure I read a Kathleen Woodowitz novel. I mean, a very shortened version of a Kathleen Woodowitz novel in Good Housekeeping at one point. And I think that may have been the first, but I also read a ton of Victoria Holt, and in every incarnation that she had, and there's Victoria Holt and Philippa Carr and Jean Plate. She wrote so many books, and those I would get out at the library. And I was a walker at school. I would walk to and from school because we lived too close for school buses, and the library was on the way home. So I would go there all the time and, see which ones they had. I don't ever recall putting a hold on a book. Somehow it never occurred to me to do that. I would just sort of, get there and be like, did somebody return, Brian Pendragon, or, so I definitely read all those too. So yeah.
And you were also a Sweet Valley High fan.
Okay. So I actually read what's called Sweet Dreams, which was a little bit different than Sweet Valley High.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I read the Sweet Valley Highs. I liked them okay, but I was really more into the Sweet Dreams.
And what was not being a Sweet Dreams fan myself, what is the difference between the two?
Well, Sweet Dreams they were not connected books. Each one was its own little teenage romance novel. So it was kind of like, the Harlequin or Mills and Boone of teenage romance. Whereas Sweet Valley High had this whole world and, these twins, one was good, one was evil, and went on forever. So that was more of like, Beverly Hills 90210. And it kind of makes sense that I would have gravitated toward the Sweet Dreams because each book has a happy ending. And with Sweet Valley High, it was more of an ongoing thing. And I like my happy endings.
You were propelled by the combination of Sweet Dreams and Sweet Valley High to Harvard, where you studied art history. Was that?
Yes.
It does. The causal link is so clear.
It makes such sense when you say it like that.
Was art history something that you were going to with a particular goal in mind?
No, I kind of fell into it. And it was actually history of architecture. Art history is kind of the name of the major. It's like fine arts. And what happened was, at some point in my career there, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life, as one does then. And I got it in my head that I thought I might want to go into architecture. And so I started taking some classes toward that. And I think it was my sophomore year, I was taking a design class and I was also taking a history of architecture class. And by the end of the year, I realized I did not enjoy the design class that much, but I loved the history of architecture class. And it was just this really interesting way of looking at history, through the built environment. So, people, they hear I've majored in art history, they think I'm going to be able to talk really, intelligently about the great masters. And I cannot, I'm afraid, perhaps, better than the average person on the street, but not much. But it was really more about buildings and urban planning and how that built environment affects our world. And that's what I was really interested in. And I never, ever intended to do anything with it. That's kind of, the beauty and the conceit of going to Harvard, that I think it's expected there that you went to Harvard, you should, you're qualified, you can do something. The name should be enough. So they don't actually have any, what we'd call practical degrees. It's all, I guess, except for like engineering, which I wasn't going to go into. It's all arts and sciences. You can't do marketing or pre-law or, business as an undergraduate. So I was like, well, in some ways this is more practical than other people because I could become a curator, I guess.
That's right. I don't have to become a philosopher, which is
yes.
one of the other options on the table.
Mm-hmm.
When did the switch flip for you from reader to writer, from somebody who loved reading to somebody who thought, I can do this?
Well, you actually inadvertently hinted at it earlier when you mentioned, moving on from Sweet Dreams and Sweet Valley High to Harvard. And let me back you up. And there actually is, you were laughing about it, but there actually is a connection.
Excellent. I'm ready.
What happened was when I was about 13, I was reading Sweet Dreams and such. And my parents were divorced. I was at my dad's place for the summer, and he's a bit of an intellectual, and he was looking at my reading material and was trying so hard not to put it down, but you could tell that he really thought I should be reading, I don't know, Conrad or something, and which of course is what
as teenagers do.
As every 13-year-old girl wants to read Heart of Darkness over the summer. So, he came up and he said, why are you reading this? Tell me about it. Tell me what you like about it. So I started trying to tell him what I liked about it. And he said, okay, but how does it enrich you? What do you get out of it? And I said, I was trying to figure this out. I was not prepared for this question. And I said, well, I'm learning vocabulary words. And he said, oh, okay. Well, can you point to a word or two that are in that book that you didn't already know? And this is where I say, reader, I could not. And, I don't know whether this says more about my vocabulary at age 13 or just what was in the books. There are many great qualities to a Sweet Dreams romance, but an extensive vocabulary was not one of them, I have to admit. And so I couldn't do that one. So I said, well, I'm reading these because I'm doing research, because I'm going to write one. At which point he said, okay. And so that night, he sat me down in his office, and we were one of the only people around who had a home computer. This was like 1983. It was an Osborne, I remember. The screen, no, you can't see me, but I'm making a very small screen with my fingers. It was, maybe 8-inch screen, tops diagonal.
With the green letters. Yeah.
With the green letters, black, and the blinking cursor. We used WordStar, which was an old word processing program. He sat me down. I started typing, and he told me later he was sure I was going to come back in a half hour or so and be like, well, give me the Conrad. And, but I just kept going. And he came back in about 3 or 4 hours later, and I'm still in there and I'm typing and I'm writing my story. And I ended up, over the course of 2 summers, I wrote a novel, which I then submitted to Sweet Dreams. And I wrote, what I still believe is a very, very good cover letter. And saying, because I'm, at this point, I think I was 16. I said, because I'm a 16-year-old, I think you'll find this book to be more authentic, more this, whatever. And I was rejected so fast that I know that there's no way they ever read it. Because I know a thing or two about publishing now. Nobody gets rejected in a week and a half. It just doesn't happen.
That speaks to a certain efficiency on the slush pile. That's somebody was on that.
I know. And so I'm sure nobody read it. And I still maintain it was of equal or higher quality than a lot of stuff they were doing. But so here's where we get to the point. Fast forward another year or so, and I'm applying to college. And I was kind of demoralized enough by this that I never sent it anywhere else. But now I'm applying to college, and I get to a question on my application, and it says, tell us about a book that has been especially meaningful in your life. So I wrote about the book I wrote. And I am convinced to this day that that is how I got into Harvard, because it had to have been the only thing that set me apart from other people. I mean, the application pool is filled with people who score well and get grades and work hard, but I think I was the only one who wrote a teenage romance novel. And I'm convinced that's how I got in. So there you go.
Your writing continued through school, and you made a decision at a certain point that you wanted to study medicine. And my understanding is that you wrote novels as a break from studying science. Is that something to do in your off hours? Is that correct?
Sort of. What happened was, it was in my senior year, I decided that maybe I wanted to do medicine. And it kind of joke, it's really because, who knows how to get a job, right? I don't know how to get a job, but I knew how to apply to school. I'd done that. So I was like, oh, then I'll apply to medical school. This is a very narrow worldview, but I also sort of rediscovered a love of science toward the end of my senior year. I was this classic case of the girl who thought she shouldn't be into science because it wasn't girlish, which is a horrible, horrible thing. And hopefully we're getting past that. But I rediscovered a love of science. And so I thought, actually, this would be pretty cool. But then, because I had majored in art history, I hadn't taken these science courses that you have to take in order to even apply to medical school. So I spent the next 2 years taking these courses and taking organic chemistry and physics and stuff like that. And because I was taking these courses, I couldn't hold down a full-time job. I mean, it would have been impossible. So I was working as a fundraiser for various charities and stuff like that, which is not terribly taxing mentally. And so in my free time, I thought, okay, well, I'll work on this novel that I had kind of started between junior and senior year of college. And I worked on that. And then in May of 1994, I was accepted to medical school and I got my first book deal, all basically in the same month. And it was an exciting month, possibly one of the most exciting months of my life until this past month, which we'll get to, which has been pretty incredible.
Yes.
But I ended up deferring medical school for a couple years to pursue the writing. And then I had like a little crazy crisis of confidence. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not qualified for anything. Everybody I know is going to graduate school and I better go to medical school. And so I did that for about 3 months. And then I withdrew. I said, this is not right for me. And I have not looked back. And as you mentioned earlier, I am married to a doctor, so I know exactly what I'm missing.
The road not traveled is right in front of you all the time.
Oh.
Yeah.
The road not traveled is, I can stick my toe into it at any time. And he's actually not an epidemiologist. He's an infectious disease specialist, which is not quite the same thing. And that particular road this particular year has been particularly brutal.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that you sent that first manuscript to your mom. Did she give you some feedback on that?
I did. She did. She said she read it. And this is, back in the day when you would have to print it out and put it in the mail. And it was a big deal to send a manuscript out. And I was living across the country from her. And she read it. She said, wow, I never knew you were such a good writer. And she goes, but it's not Judith McNaught. And I was like, okay, Mom, thank you. And she categorically denies this now. She has no recollection, but I mean, I would never. How could I make that up? You could not make that up.
But to be fair, to her was Judith McNaught the gold standard to which all other
probably, yeah,
romance novels should be judged?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. So, like, that may have just been an unattainable bar to clear at the time.
It certainly was for my first novel. I'm
doing my best to give your mom the benefit of the doubt.
It's okay. She has been forgiven. And my dad too. Both of them are now my biggest fans.
Excellent.
Yeah, there are other things for which I may not forgive them, but not that.
Yeah, you don't just write individual books, you write series. And as booksellers, we love that. Thank you very much. Always good to have a series to sell. Before the Bridgerton series began, you wrote, I think, 7 books in 5 years, which in itself is impressive as output. And there was the Splendid Trilogy, and then 2 books of the Linden Sisters, and 2 books of the Agents of the Crown, which I really liked.
Oh, thank you.
It made me wonder how a series gets started when it's the first book in a 2-book arc like the Linden Sisters, or the first book in an 8-book series like Bridgerton's. Do you know what you're getting into when you start that first book?
Almost never. I mean, some authors do. Don't get me wrong. I have, one of the lovely things about romance is that you tend to know a lot of other authors in your field. And so I have talked to other authors, and there are as many ways to do this as there are people. And even for me, each one is a little bit different. I'm thinking and also I wrote those books so long ago, I'm not sure I can actually fully recall. I know with the Bridgerton series, I did not set out to write an 8-book series. Originally I thought it was going to be 3, and my editor said, no, just make it 2, because whenever somebody writes a trilogy, the first book's exciting, and then they save the most interesting character for last, and then the second one's kind of like, but then I really argued for the 3, and then before we could, at some point, then the series took off, and then they were like, no, do 8, it'll be great. So that was flying by the seat of my pants. I was not planned at all. And in fact, there was places where I realized I kind of wrote myself into a hole. At one point I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to have 3 28-year-old spinsters in a row. What am I going to do? And so I casually decided and mentioned that Francesca, who's the heroine of the 6th book, had gotten married and widowed. And I didn't even say anything other than that. And then of course I get up to her book and I'm like, oh crap, I got to figure out what happened to her. How do I do this now? But I'm glad I did, because I needed to get it set up so that it could be a different type of story than the rest. But for most books, I don't have them super plotted out. I may with a series know who is going to star in it, but I haven't figured out the stories.
Looking back now over a number of books, are there characteristics that you see for a Julia Quinn female protagonist or a Julia Quinn male protagonist? Like if we lined up 6 young women in their first season, or 6 dukes chafing against the responsibility of their titles from 6 different authors, how would we pick a Julia Quinn protagonist out of that lineup?
Well, they definitely have a sense of humor. They absolutely have a sense of humor, and they are even, and none of them are perfect. They all have flaws, but they are at heart, I think, good people you'd want to be friends with. I've written damaged people, but never so damaged that they are unnecessarily cruel and mean. I've joked before that I've tried to write a bad boy, and then he keeps turning around and doing something nice. And I like reading books with bad boy heroes, but I can't seem to do it. And, and I guess it makes sense. I married the ultimate nice guy. I mean, he goes to work every day to save humanity. I mean, he's, Mr. Feminist. I don't, what else can I do? But yeah, I think just ultimately good people with a sense of humor who are very loyal to the people they love. I think that is at its heart, where they start.
When you were first starting to write, or even now, were you thinking, these are things that in this genre I want to do differently, or here's what I want to do that's going to make this interesting to me?
Yeah, I do know. I remember when I was writing my first book, there was one thing that I did set out, I very consciously thought about, and that was that I wanted to depict female friendship. I felt that at least then, and I don't think this is the case now, but then it was lacking in the genre. I mean, and I'm sure And you could point to several cases where it was, but as an overall thing, you just didn't see it that much. You saw some male friendship, but it was very easy to sort of, pit the heroine against, some mean girl or something. And I understand in many ways where these things come from. In order to create interesting characters, one of the best ways to do that is to isolate them in some way. So you take away their family, you take away their friendships, and that can really create a dynamic and interesting character. And I've certainly done that. But I just, at that point, I was like, I want her to have a friend. Let's give her a friend. In that case, it turned out to be her cousin, but I was like, let's give her a best friend. I mean, don't we all want a best friend? Why not? And so that's something that you've seen a lot of in my books, people with, some good, healthy relationship outside of the romantic one. It's not everywhere, but I just really wanted to show that, be like, hey, you know what? Women can be friends. We're not all like these backstabbing whatevers. Why not? The heroine doesn't have to be lifted onto a pedestal in, contrast to some awful woman. She can be lifted to the pedestal because she's friends with a great woman. So that's something I definitely set out to do. And all along, I knew I wanted to have books with humor in it because that's what I like to read. But I think that's also just my natural writing voice. I don't know that I could write anything that didn't have some humor in it.
Well, and one of as you say that, it helps to explain one of the things that I've noticed in the books, which is that these friendships, allow for more dialogue. Like you have this, fantastic kind of crackling dialogue between different characters, but also a lot of what would otherwise be interior monologue gets to be said out loud. People get to talk about what they're feeling. They get to talk about what they're worried about. Like it comes out more because they have someone to talk to, which is kind of nice. The Bridgerton series started with The Duke and I in 2000 and is the story of this extremely tight-knit family of 8 alphabetically named siblings, each book telling the story of one family member's romantic story. And 8, let's be clear, is not a bad number of books for a series. But this one has also spiraled out into other families, the Roxby family, the Smythe-Smith quartet, the Lady Whistledown novellas. Did you get to the end of 8 books and think, I'm just not ready to leave these people yet?
No, I got to the end of 8 books and thought, I'm done for a while. Mm-hmm. I really needed to sort of set it apart. And I purposely didn't go back there for a while. And it was very odd. I remember the first thing that I did that was completely separate was the Two Dukes of Wyndham, a duet of books. There was a book that came out in between, but that one had actually been at least half written before. So that was the first thing that was entirely new. And it was a very kind of weird and scary thing in a way. Be like, this isn't, I can't fall back on the rest of this world that I've created. But I think I needed actually to step aside for a while. But the Bridgertons were always there in some respect. I ended up writing these second epilogues, because readers would come to me. They say, well, what happened to so-and-so? Did she ever find the diamonds? And did this person have a baby? And what happened when he found the letters? And I would just say, I don't know.
I will get back to you.
They would be horrified. They'd be like, well, I wasn't even prepared to do that. I finished the book. I'm like, the book's done. I'm not one of these authors who lives and breathes for characters all the time. And so when I finish a book, I finish the book. And honestly, I don't think a great deal about those characters again, unless I'm bringing them back as secondary characters to support another story, which I do from time to time. And, readers, I think some readers were really upset about this. I think they, in their minds, I, fell asleep dreaming of these characters every night. And so I would write these extra stories like, okay, well, here, we can revisit these characters. A couple of them were like 30 years later and some were, 5 days later, but here's what happened. And so those were actually, that was a lot of fun to write these. They're about 30 pages long. And in addition to maybe, answering a question that somebody had or just, being kind of indulgent, I was able to do some things that were a little different for me. I wrote one in the first person. I got to write, the only time I've really written an intimate scene between a couple that has been married for a long time as opposed to, still in those throes of courtship, which was very, very different. So yes, those were a lot of fun too. And it's obviously writing something that's 30 pages long is very different than writing a whole novel.
With these series, as they start to come together and you're trying to figure out the next one, the next book, is that an organic process as you find characters and situations that you're interested in? Or when you're in the middle of a big series, is there a giant map on the wall somewhere in your house in Seattle with pins and strings and lines and everything all mapped out?
Yeah, any map with pins and strings usually has to do with the COVID epidemic. But no, I'm not, in terms of like my overall career, I'm definitely not a plotter. I've talked to authors and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going to write this book and that book and this book and that one. And I'm like, I don't even know what I'm going to do next. I rarely, and that's why I end up taking off too much time off between projects as well, because I'm sort of like, what am I going to do? It's much more of an organic, but organic seems to even imply that it like can be counted on in some way.
It just naturally flows.
Yeah.
It's like a rusty machine.
Yeah. Like clawing to get my head above water with this and be like, I need an idea.
Looking across the genres of writing, romance is one that has traditions. It has tropes and forms that both readers are conscious of as they're picking the book up, writers are conscious of as they're writing, and that's not in any way unique to romance. Ask a crime novelist about traditions and tropes. But I'm interested in your relationship to the tradition of romance. Do you have a sense of how far you can push and pull the form? Is that something that's interesting to you, or is it like the water that you swim in?
Very interesting question. I would not describe myself as a writer who pushes the envelope a lot in romance. I'm really more interested in how creative I can be within it. But that said, as I say that, I think, well, actually, I have done a few things that are kind of different, but it's more structural than story-wise, if that makes sense. And that to me has helped keep it a little fresh for me. So for example, I mentioned the series I wrote a while back called The Two Dukes of Wyndham, and it's 2 books. And what was different about it, especially from a writing standpoint, is that each one has its own romance. So it has its own internal story, but they share the same external plot, which is who is the true Duke of Wyndham. And so you have scenes that take place in both books, but from different points of view. And I realized as I was trying to get this set up that the only way to write it so that the second book and the characters wouldn't be completely dependent on what I chose to do for the first would be to write them simultaneously. So I wrote those 2 novels at the same time, which was completely fascinating. I loved it, and I will also never do it again. But for me, that is how I like to elbow the edge of the envelope and things like that, rather than, shaking up the story in a big way, because, with romance, I want that happy ending.
In a speech that you gave to the Romance Writers of America in 2015, you said that one of the most important things to realize as a writer is that you have to accept you can't please everyone all the time. How long did it take you to figure that out? Oh,
I'm still figuring that out to some degree. And it's not just as a writer, I think in life, especially, as a woman, we want, we're trying to please everybody. And that's, I'm that type of person. I'm the type of person who, I want people to like me. And if I love something, I want everybody to love it. And it's, even if it's not my thing, it's like, if I find a favorite book, but I want you to like my favorite book too. And that's who I am. And so it is, it's a constant, difficult struggle. And it's tough at times too, because as you become more of a public figure, which has happened with Bridgerton, the Netflix series a little bit, suddenly people are, they're not just picking apart your books, they're picking apart you in some respect. And so it's really kind of have to remember, okay, you know what? I can't please everybody all the time. And I just have to, I don't want to only please myself. It's not just about that. Because I'm not writing for myself. I am writing for my readers. So you got to kind of find some happy medium. And I have a few benchmarks that I have adopted as signs of success. So for example, for every book that I've written, somebody has told me that it is absolutely the best book I've written. And somebody's told me that it is without a doubt the worst. And for me, that's a really good sign. That means that I'm doing something right. Because one of my big goals is not to write the same book over and over again, and not to have that one book that outshines everything. And sure, there's some books that more people mark as their favorite than others, but I like that. I like, some people saying, no, that's not her best book. This one is, and no, this week. So anyway.
But you do have this very engaged, passionate audience, and readers reach out to you all the time. Mm-hmm. And you have lots of readers, so this is the very definition of a high-class problem. But how do you think about that back and forth, and what are the kinds of things that they tell you when they reach out?
Some of it are just, oh, I love the book. Some very, basic stuff. But, sometimes you'll get stuff that's very meaningful. People will say how much these books meant to them during a difficult time in their life, which I think, when you write books with happy endings, perhaps you hear more than the people writing, dark Scandinavian crime dramas, which are also wonderful books, but maybe not what you need to carry you through a difficult time in your life. So I hear that. Another thing I hear, which was very startling at first, but also very gratifying, is I've heard from women who have said to me that before they found romance novels, they were functionally illiterate. And it was only when they actually found books that they wanted to read that they began to say, women, I want to read this. I want to do this. And they really learned how to read. And that to me is incredibly powerful. And that was something that really kind of humbled me. And like, I just sort of lay down for a while being like, oh my gosh. But in truth, my readers, it's really a spectrum. I'll hear from, the women who've said things like that. And then I'll hear from people who are professors at MIT. It's really all across the board where they read. And so it's kind of nice to see the variety and the diversity within the readership is just so much fun.
But they will let you know if they don't like something. Like if something has, if a character hasn't landed properly for them, they're going to tell you.
They will. Yeah. And when they're disappointed, they're always profoundly disappointed. It's never just plain disappointment. But I don't see as much of that, I think, anymore, because I took the email link off my website, so people can no longer email me. And that wasn't why I removed the email link. It was more because it was taking me so long to answer that I was afraid I just wasn't even going to get to some. And I would rather not get the email than not answer it. So I used to tell people I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I don't necessarily answer everything on Instagram, but if you post to my Facebook wall, I will answer you. And maybe and some people will post their disappointments on the wall, but I think a lot of people don't feel comfortable posting their profound disappointment on the wall. So
that's good.
So maybe I'm just seeing less of it now. But we do sometimes get in political discussions over there. Not much. I try to stay out of it, but anybody who's over on the Facebook wall knows where I stand, I think. Yeah, and readers, I think they're great. I think I would not be a writer, or I'd have difficulty being a writer in an age where you don't have that communication with readers. I write because I want to be read. I'm not just writing for the sake of writing. It's not just for me. I really like knowing that these words are being received somewhere.
As a bookseller, one of the reasons I love talking to authors of romance and science fiction and crime, and it's something that you've talked about before, is that you're in a marketplace. You know the romance market, and over time, you've gained more experience of how that marketplace works. How do you, as a writer, balance that knowledge of the market that you're in and the things that the market wants versus trusting your instinct as a writer and going with your gut on the kinds of stories you want to tell?
I'm kind of fortunate in that what I have wanted to write has always been fairly squarely within the marketplace. Mm-hmm. I really gravitated toward a Regency set historical, which is what I like to read, which has, for the last 25 years been one of the most, if not the most popular, settings within historical romance. So, I never really had to, face down this big question of, do I go this way or that way, based on the marketplace. So I think that hasn't really been a difficult question for me. I think I tend to be squarely within it, which is extremely lucky, frankly.
You published your first book in 1995. Mm-hmm. How has romance as a genre changed in that time? Are there new themes or new expectations that you have either brought into your writing or you felt like you had to look at as the times change?
The first big change, I think, that I really saw was just a move towards a lot more explicit intimate scenes in romance, which I just sort of sailed past. I kind of am writing at the same level of sensuality I always have been, which is somewhere in the middle. I always tell people, I don't shut the bedroom door, but I'm also not 50 Shades of Grey. It's, it's somewhere in the middle. It was funny. I do have one book, When He Was Wicked, which I think is a little bit spicier than the rest, but that was what the story called for. And it was kind of funny. I remember reading some review where somebody saying, I wonder if her publisher was pressuring her to make her books hotter. And I was like, no, that's what the story was. But the biggest change, which is more recent and still has a ways to go, is that it's becoming a lot more inclusive and a lot more diverse. And that is wonderful. And I'm ashamed to say it's something I didn't really notice for a while. I mean, it just, because it didn't affect me. I knew I had, author friends who were Black and they were writing, and I assumed everything was fine because they were there. But, I had no clue to really the extra hurdles that they were having to jump over just to, get their foot in the door, and how many people were discouraged because they just couldn't be heard. And I think, things are opening up now. And again, it's still not where it needs to be, but it is getting a lot better. And so one of the things that I've been doing as an author, or trying to, is to shine a light on some of these books that people might not find otherwise. Because that's a age-old problem within book selling and being an author, is like, how do people find your books? I actually worked in a bookstore for a while, and, I can remember, okay, well, let's take this book and put it up front and maybe someone will see it. I mean, if you bury it, if nobody sees the book, how are they going to buy it? So I've been really trying to show people, hey, there's this great book, like my friend Vanessa Riley, she writes books set in the Regency with characters of color. And I want people to know that this exists. You can try it. I'm not saying you have to read it, but you should know it's there and know that it's an option. And I hope you'll give it a try, because it's a great book. So I've been trying to use my spotlight to shine a light on other authors. And I've been doing that for several years now. And obviously not just authors of color, but, everyone. Just, it's been kind of a fun thing to be able to take this, spot that I suddenly have in this world and be like, hey, look at this book. This is really cool.
And this creates a great segue to Bridgerton, the TV series. Mm-hmm. When did you first know it was going to get made?
So it was almost precisely 4 years ago. I was sitting in Starbucks, and I got a call from my agent. And he said, have you heard of Shonda Rhimes? And I said, yes. And he said, well, I got this phone call. And we were just like, wow, who knew? And so, really didn't get my hopes up at first, because, I know authors who've had their books optioned, and it's, much more likely to get your book optioned and then have nothing happen than to get your book optioned and have something actually get made. But all along the way, I kept looking, being like, it really feels like this is going to happen. Seems like this is actually going to happen. And it just kept moving forward. And it's this wonderful story of everything going right. And, it took a while, because, first we had to do the contract, and then she was moving from Shondaland. Well, she's still at Shondaland, but then she was making her deal with Netflix. But yeah, it's incredible.
A few things jump out at us when we watch the show. Mm-hmm. The first is that it's gorgeous, mm-hmm. Just sumptuously beautiful. When did you first get a hint of what it was going to look like, of how your world was going to show up on the screen?
So before I even knew anything about the cast, I was given the directors of the art director and the costume director. And so I was able to sort of do a little research on them and look at what they've done. And that's when at which point I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be incredible. These are not fly-by-night people. These are people with incredible backgrounds and resumes. Yeah, so that was incredible. And then I feel like I'll keep saying incredible over and over again, but it's true. And then, then they started announcing the cast, and my head basically exploded.
And that was the second thing that jumped out, and the one that I think got a lot of coverage when it was first released, was an approach to casting that made for a much more diverse and interesting cast than the usual collection of pale faces we usually see in a story about the English aristocracy. Did you know that was in the works from early on?
So, it's Shondaland, so I knew they were going to be doing something more inclusive, but I wasn't necessarily sure how. I mean, there are a number of ways you could have attacked it. You could have tweaked the stories and made the stories, written a slightly different story. You could have done true colorblind casting, which is not at all what it is. We much prefer to call it color conscious casting, because there was a lot of thought that went into the casting and how it was done. But they found this kind of incredible in-between spot, which is, this diverse cast, but reimagining the society in a way that is actually based on a very interesting historical nugget, which is that many people think that Queen Charlotte was of mixed race. And this is something that historians have been debating for many, many years. And so the writers, and in particular Chris Van Dusen, the showrunner, thought, well, what if this was just accepted then? No longer this thing under debate, this nugget under debate, but what if this was accepted? And then what if she used her position to elevate other people of color within society? What would society look like at that point? And then they went on from there. And so I love that they created this slightly alternate reality, but based on something very real in history. And they just went from there. And I think it's amazing. And the emotion I feel most of all actually is gratitude, because I'm one person. I can only be as diverse as one person can be. But when you get this writer's room, and that's the other really important point, everybody looks at the cast, but take a step back and look at the writer's room. The writer's room on Bridgerton was incredibly diverse in terms of gender, sexual orientation, race, religion, everything. It was the most incredibly diverse group. And so when you get all these people in, they can take the story that started with me, but they bring their imagination to it and their lived experiences. And they were able to expand it in a way that, frankly, I by myself could not. And so I'm just incredibly grateful to them for doing that, for taking the story and helping to turn it into something where everyone can see themselves, can see a piece of themselves in it, and can look at it and say, yeah, I get a happy ending too. And I love that, because I think everybody deserves a happy ending, and everybody deserves to be able to see themselves in a happy ending. So I could not be happier.
The first season was a huge hit. It got binge watch at my house over the course of maybe 3 days over the holidays. But much more importantly, a news story I saw just today said it is now officially the biggest viewership of any Netflix series that's ever been made. So congratulations. That has to feel pretty good.
Thank you. I think specifically it's the biggest debut.
Okay.
Saying. I don't know if it's all series, but the biggest debut. So we'll be precise.
And does that mean we will get a second season?
Yes, it was renewed. Was it just last week? But yes, it was renewed for a second season. And they say they're going to start filming this spring. I'm not involved with production issues, so I'm not sure how they're going to make that happen, but I believe it if they say they will. And I have not seen any scripts yet. So, because people are like, well, is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? And I'm like, I don't know. But, having written the source material, I can tell you that it's going to be really fun, because I think we all are eager for Anthony to get his comeuppance
And that means you cannot answer the most important question I have this interview, which is whether we get to see an on-screen version of a Smythe-Smith musicale.
I don't know. I can tell you I have talked about that with Chris Van Dusen. We have shared our mutual love for the Smythe-Smiths, but I have no idea whether or when they could appear. And certainly, they could, not appear in season 2 and, cross fingers, that we get more, they could come in down the road. So I don't know. But I mean, do we really want to listen to that? I mean, did you hear, we sort of got a taste of it when poor Prudence Featherington was singing.
That is true.
That was something to behold. Oh my goodness.
Tell me a little bit about your experience of this last year in the pandemic. I mean, you certainly have family member who is on the front lines of this, but I also talk to authors who some have become super productive, others are having trouble sitting down and getting things done. How has it been for you and your household?
I have not been writing a lot. I've been working on, and some of it's for professional reasons. I've had different commitments with the show, the time leading up to it and since. And I've also been working on my next book coming out, is actually a graphic novel, which I have co-done with my sister. And so there's been that. But I think the biggest thing is that I have seen the toll that this pandemic has taken on my husband, who, as I said, is a doctor who specializes in infectious diseases in Seattle, which was the very first deaths in the country. And his job has become so overwhelming that, many respects, I've really kind of shifted into just caretaker mode and taking care of my family, because, I do have 2 children and their lives were disrupted in a huge way as well. And I just like, I'm incredibly fortunate that I am able to take some time off from work and just really focus on helping them. And most specifically my husband, because, he's just, it's so difficult to actually explain how his job has changed, but he's still doing everything he was before. But now on top of that, he's giving interviews like you wouldn't believe, because he's very articulate. And so I think he's given 200 interviews since the pandemic began, many of them for local television, some like CNN, BBC, all these things. And this is just on top of his job. It's not suddenly they're like, okay, now you're spokesperson. It's like, please do this in addition to all this. And then, constant meetings of trying to explain to people, okay, these are the protocols and this is why we do it. And, so not necessarily talking to the patients, but talking to other health professionals, being like, okay, this is how we are setting these things up. And then just also these really weird things, like somehow he ended up getting pulled in as the medical advisor to the Pac-12 college football conference, like advising them on how to safely house and practice with their teams. And, and he's not even like a college football fan. So we're sort of like, what? How did that happen? And I think the NFL asked him too, and he was just like, I cannot do anymore. So yeah, around here, it's really been a lot of focus on supporting him. But because of all that, I think in our house, when Bridgerton did debut to such success and it being such a happy show, I mean, yes, we have all the drama, whatever, but it is at its core something that makes people happy. I think it has given our household this jolt of joy, which has been so incredibly wonderful. And, so many people have said, the timing of this was very fortuitous. It came along right when everybody needed it. But, in my house, I think we also really needed it too. Speaking
of family, tell me about the project Miss Buttersworth and the Mad Baron that you're doing with your sister.
Yes, this is so much fun. And it kind of harkens back to when I was telling you, like for me, the way I like to push the envelope sometimes is to work with structure. And so this is a classic case of that in doing a graphic novel. And what happened was way back in It's in His Kiss, which is the 7th Bridgerton book, Hyacinth, the heroine of that story, would visit Lady Danbury, who show watchers will hopefully love. She's one of my favorite characters. She would go there once a week and read to her. And she was reading to her from this like over the top Gothic novel called Miss Butterworth and the Mad Baron, where, every chapter ends with this poor girl hanging from a cliff or being thrown off a cliff or getting, both her legs are broken. She gets all these things. And I had so much fun writing it that, I ended up popping it into another novel. And then another one where suddenly we end up revealing who the author is. And it was just this ongoing book within a book that I had so much fun with. And then readers started asking me to write it. And I said, I can't do that. It's really fun to write snippets and paragraphs, but I couldn't possibly write a whole novel of this. But then at that time, my younger sister was, really kind of starting forth her career as a cartoonist and illustrator. And it occurred to me that it would make a really fun graphic novel. And, she was really looking for a project too. And so we ended up doing it together. And she did a lot more of the work than I did, but it is really fun. And I'm so excited for people to see it in August. It's, it's still a romance, definitely a romance, but it's something totally different. And actually, younger readers it'd be totally appropriate for younger readers too. There are talking pigeons, so we break the fourth wall in some places. It's fun. It's really fun.
If I'm not mistaken, a book within a book that also appears in another author's book, because I think it shows up in an Eloisa James novel as well, doesn't it?
Probably. I think she asked me my permission to do that. I've done that before too. I actually had I can't remember which book it is, but I had a character reading a book that was written by Elisa Kleypas, heroine too. We have fun.
Yeah.
We're all friends. We like to do that.
Well, and I think I have seen a Julia Quiplet, I think, show up in an Eloisa James novel next to Elisa Clampus.
Yes, that would be true.
You have what seems to be this fairly close connection to a circle of other romance writers. Who's in that circle? Like, who are the people that you reach out to when you are either like struggling with the work or just needing the like emotional support to get to the next page?
Gosh, that's so hard because I'm afraid I'm going to leave someone out, but certainly Eloisa and Lisa. My very closest friend in the world is Stephanie Sloan, who is a lesser known author, but like I've been friends with her since before she wrote. Sarah McLean, Tessa Dare, Vanessa Riley. I know I'm forgetting people, but yeah, all these people.
You can blame us and say that we cut them out in editing.
Yes, they cut. If you didn't hear your name, they cut you out. Exactly.
Are there authors out there who you are fascinated by, who you just grab every time you see them on the shelves?
Yeah. And, there are some romance authors who I can't understand why, they're not more people are reading them. Like the one sort of unsung gem who I love is Julie Ann Long, who writes, she's written a couple contemporary romances, but mostly historical romance. And her big series, which I think she has completed, is called Pennyroyal Green. That's the name of a village or whatever, which is just fabulous. And I thrust those books into everybody's hands I can. And those I think are really, really great. I mean, I love all the books by the people I mentioned. I have a couple, outside of romance. I love one of my favorite books in the entire world is called The Last Days of Summer by Steve Kluger. I don't know if you know that one. I love that book so much. It's an epistolary novel, which I adore. Oh, there's another great book that nobody knows about that I love so much. It's called Lost in Place, Growing Up Absurd in Suburbia by Mark Salzman. Did I get you? Did I find one you don't know?
I do not know that one. Yes, you totally did.
Yay! That's a memoir, which is just amazing. And I love it so much. And I picked it up because it opens with, oh, you know what? Actually, I have it over here. So I'm going to actually read you the opening. Hold on a minute.
I've read other books by Mark Salzman, if it's the same one.
Yes, probably. He wrote a book called Iron and Silk.
Yes.
Which I think is his more well-known one.
Yeah.
So this is actually a memoir. And the reason I picked it up, it opens this. It says, when I was 13 years old, I saw my first Kung Fu movie. And before it ended, I decided that the life of a wandering Zen monk was the life for me. I announced my willingness to leave Eastridge Junior High School immediately and give up all material things, but my parents did not share my enthusiasm. Well, I went to Eastridge Junior High School. So yes, that's how this book fell into my hands, because I was like, wait a minute, I went to Eastridge, and it says here, the oldest child in a middle-class household in Ridgefield, Connecticut. And I was like, that's me. And so, that's how I found it, because I had this personal connection to the setting, but it's this incredible memoir that I have read several times, and I read with my children. And that's a book I just absolutely adore. And
give us the name of the book again.
It's a long title. It's called Lost in Place, Growing Up Absurd in Suburbia. And I think he's about 10 years older than I am. So it's not quite the same time frame, but it's I don't know. It's one of those books that really calls to you. Like, I recommend a lot of romance novels to people. And I hate when romance novelists go on and list their 10 best books and none of them are romances. I will never do that. But this is one I'd like to tell people they should pick up.
Can you still immerse yourself in a book? Can you lose yourself in it? Or are you making notes along the way?
Both. I mean, it really depends. I can lose myself in a book, but every now and then you'll read something and be like, oh, that was an awkward point of view switch. I think it's easier to jolt me out. But no, I absolutely can immerse myself, which is good.
Last question. Does your mom still rearrange bookstore shelves so your books face out?
My dad sure does. My mom probably does. But I know my dad does, because I've had to caution him. I'm like, Dad, you don't want to be that creepy old guy in the romance section, okay? You need to which isn't to say men shouldn't read romance, because they should, but he was out there grabbing, he's like, have you read this one? It's really, really good. I was like, stop. But yes, no, my parents absolutely do that. And I do too.
Of course you do. Why wouldn't you?
Everybody does that. Oh my gosh, yes.
Julia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. This has been so much fun.
I have been speaking with Julia Quinn, author of the Bridgerton series and so many others. Check the show notes for links to the Kobo store, where you'll find all of Julia's books and all of the books that we've talked about today. And you can find past episodes of Kobo in Conversation at kobo.com/conversation. Make sure to catch every conversation by subscribing wherever you listen and leave us a review. It helps other readers to find us and gives you a chance to tell us what you'd like to hear more of. Kobo in Conversation is produced by Nathan Maharaj, edited by Kelly Robotham, and hosted by me, Michael Tamblyn. Thank you for listening.